So, hello. Welcome to Baking Better Bread, a great bread at home. My name is Henry Hunter. I'm the founder of Henry's Bread Kitchen. And we come together today, like we've done for the past week, hopefully in a few weeks, to give people a little project, something to do while you're at home and we're sequestered here. We can't go anywhere, so we might as well do something constructive. A lot of us like to bake, and we sometimes don't necessarily get the result we want. And there are a few things that we either do or we don't do that really affect the outcome of your product. And I want to cover some of that this morning before we get into cinnamon buns. All right? So let's talk about flour one more time. I mentioned this last week. There are all kinds of flour on the shelf, and do I get all-purpose flour? Do I get bread flour, whole wheat flour? In the United States, the majority of the flour that we process here is a hard red wheat. And in that kernel, in that wheat kernel, is the endosperm, the bran, and the wheat germ. So those three things are important because in a whole wheat flour, you've got endosperm, bran, and the wheat. That's why they call it the whole wheat, because it's all in there. And you can tell that it's darker, it's more red, looks like the berry it came from, and it will absorb a lot more liquid out of your recipe than typical. So if you've got a recipe that doesn't call for whole wheat and you decide to add some whole wheat, remember you're changing the recipe. If this has about 13% protein. Let's talk about protein for 1 second. In flour, there's glutamine and gliadin. And those things apart don't do anything else. But when it's combined with water, then all of a sudden they make a protein chain called gluten. We all know about what gluten. We know about gluten. I'm not sure how much we all know about what gluten is. Gluten is a protein that forms a chain. When you actually knead it and work with it, it will get stronger, more elastic, and more extensible. So it'll stretch and it'll come back. It's great. It's a great thing. So this has got about 13% protein in it. This is on the high end, 13 to 14% protein. This is a bread flour. This has got about between 11 and 12.7 grams of protein in this. So this is higher in protein. This is less high in protein. This is what you're going to use if you're making bread and you want that chewy texture and you want that tight crumb like you see in typical sandwich loaves. This is a new flour. This is a white lily. I haven't talked about all-purpose yet. This is sort of an all-purpose flour. It's made with a soft wheat. It's a much softer wheat, and it's a white wheat. So this is good for cakes and muffins and cupcakes and things like that. The all-purpose flour, which I have a 50-pound bag of under the counter, so I can't represent it up here. But the all-purpose flour is just what it says. It's all-purpose. It doesn't have any of the bran or any of the germ in it. It has all of the endosperm, which is where you get your extensibility and you get your that sort of thing from. The bran, you're going to get a lot of your fiber. And in the germ, you're going to get oils. So when you have a whole wheat flour, you're going to get all those benefits of the bran and the germ and the oils and the whole 9 yards. This is what we bake bread with. So I had a lady last week who did not have all-purpose flour to make the bread we were making, and she decided to use 100% whole wheat, which is an honest mistake. But it's a mistake because a whole wheat loaf, 100% whole wheat loaf, is going to come out like a doorstop. It's going to be heavy, it's going to be dense, it's going to absorb a lot more water than other flours, so you usually have to up the water content, or the best thing to do with this kind of thing is to mix it with another flour. So if I'm making a multi-grain loaf or a whole grain loaf, I'm going to substitute 20% of my all-purpose flour or my bread flour for whole wheat flour. 20% is all I'm going to do. You can do a little bit more, but you'll notice it right after that. So a whole wheat bread does not necessarily mean it's got all whole wheat bread. All right, so that was a cursory glance back at what flours are. And if you've got any questions, put them in the comments and I'll be happy to address them. So the next thing is yeast and salt. Commercial yeast like this, you've been taught probably to mix it with some warm water and bloom it. And that's important for those of you who don't bake frequently and you've had yeast sitting around. You want to make sure that your yeast is active. So you want to prove your yeast. You put it in some, you get a portion of the water that goes in the recipe. You warm that water no higher than 110 degrees. You can take it and put it on your inner wrist, just like you would a baby's bottle. And that will, or use a thermometer, and that will tell you what the temperature is. Because if it's too high, it's going to kill the yeast. If it's too low, it may not activate the yeast. So you'll get a little cup, put your yeast in there, maybe a teaspoon of sugar, mix it up, and wait until it's foamy. And that tells you your yeast is active and it's good and it'll leaven your bread. With our sourdough starter, which we're going to be using next week, the CO2 that's coming off the yeast, the wild yeast that we've cultivated, is going to leaven our bread. Salt and yeast do not get along. So if you're making a recipe that requires salt and yeast, you put the salt in on one side, mix it in with the flour, and the yeast in on the other. The flour will act as a barrier to keep them from fighting. It's not really a fight because the salt is always going to win. So keep these two guys apart, and you'll see that in the way I approach this recipe today. And sugar, of course, is sugar. The other thing that really affects our loaf is temperature and humidity and barometric pressure. If you're in a room like I am now, it's warm. So I'm going to have a faster rise than you would if you were in a colder environment. Yeast bloom in warm environments, especially warm, moist environments. So if it's raining outside, you'll notice you don't need as much, maybe not as much water in your bread or in your bake than you would if you were clear blue skies, high pressure system overhead, no humidity at all. That all affects the way your dough comes out. I can tell you if it's raining just by handling dough. All right? Temperature, humidity, altitude affects it. So those are some things that you guys have to think about. You really need to think about. Now is what we call the fun part. Let's get to making some cinnamon rolls, shall we? So in a large mixing bowl, or in your bowl of a stand mixer, which is, in this case, this is what I prefer to use, because this is going to be a wet dough. This is going to be a wet dough. We can handle wet doughs, but you may not want to do it all at one time. So let me grab my handy dandy scale. Daughter's telling me my phone's doing something weird. And we're going to zero this out. Speaking of scales, remember we talked about this? This is the scale that the chef store was kind enough to not lend us, but give us, because they like the effort we're putting forward on this channel. They see your comments, they see your participation, and they're excited about it. They want to help. So you, in the comments below, figure out a creative way to work scale into your comment. And if you do that, and you go over and you like Henry's Bread Kitchen, then you're entered into the drawing to win this scale. Huh? Yeah, you know what? And that's my daughter's idea. Tag someone, let them know that they're also in the running if they participate. You know somebody else who bakes, if they don't have a scale, you gotta have a scale. Then tag that individual so that they can join us. It's the same scale I use. So here we've zeroed this out, and our recipe calls for 1 cup of lukewarm milk, 2 large eggs at room temperature. So if your eggs aren't at room temperature, put them in some water and get them there. This is what I'm going to do. I've got some things soaking, cleaned, and I'm going to add, this is my mise en place, not going according to plan, because I wanted to show you guys this. So the milk is 1 cup or 227 grams of milk. It's so much easier, it's exactly the same thing, but it's so much easier. I could pour this directly into there. You don't have to dirty up so many dishes. This is a trick that I like. 227. If I'm gonna make a mistake in measuring, I'm gonna make it over here and not in my mixing bowl. And then I need butter, because they both have to be softened. So not only have I had it sitting out on the counter, but I'm going to cut off 75 grams of butter. I'll put it right in that same container. I'll zero it so it weighs nothing. And this is 75 grams of unsalted butter. I let it sit out on the counter too long. Boom, right there. All right. Now, let's put this in the microwave for 1 minute. That'll heat up our milk and melt the butter at the same time. I don't want to deal with a lot of butter chunks in my dough right now. I've got another trick for when we deal with the icing. Zero it out. I don't need a full minute because it's already there. And what I'm using here is a digital thermometer. Remember I said I don't want this temperature over 110 degrees. There we go, 100. 100 degrees is sufficiently hot to activate your yeast. So let's put our water, our liquid ingredients in here first. And then I'm going to combine, that's my milk and my butter. And now I'm going to combine with that my yeast, which is, I'm trying to read the recipe because I can't ever remember it. It's 2 1/2 teaspoons. Now, this could also be represented in grams, but a lot of these scales, unless they're a microgram scale, don't really register well under about 3 grams. So this is 2 1/2 teaspoons of yeast. Let's see how much it weighs. It's about 8 grams. To that, we're going to add our sugar. And how much sugar are we adding to this? I've already weighed this out.
Is that meant to be water?
1/2 or 99 grams. 1/2 of a cup or 99 grams. Now I didn't put water in first. I just put the milk, the warm milk. I don't see water called for in the recipe at all. So we've got a cup of milk, we've got room temperature eggs, we've got unsalted butter, we've got King Arthur flour, salt, and granulated sugar, yeast, no water in this one. So the granulated sugar is 1/2 cup to it, but it's 99 grams. That's in. And now, it's not terribly important with this.
It's your oven.
It's not terribly important with this recipe, but typically when you're adding eggs, you want to add the eggs one egg at a time. So I'm going to add these 2 eggs, which are at room temperature. The reason you want them room temperature is so that you don't compromise the effort you put into warming up this milk. You don't want to shock it with 2 very cold eggs. So I've got everything in here except my flour and my salt. And I don't want my salt to be in. In Germany, I should use 550 flour, right? In Europe, flour strengths are different. They're called different things. If I use bread flour in the United States, I'm answering a question of one of the viewers. If I'm using bread flour in the United States, in Europe they call it strong flour. So in this case, you're going to be using something a little weaker than that. And if all you have is bread flour, 550 flour, then go ahead and use that. So this goes on to the stand mixer backwards. And I'm going to use my paddle attachment. I was using these just a minute ago, and I wanted to make sure that they were warm. So I put them in the water. All right, this is your paddle attachment. This is not your bread hook. All right, because of this flour, it's going to be, this batter is going to be, your dough is going to be a little wetter. So watch what we do. Nope, I did not add flour already. I don't want to add flour just yet. I want to get my liquid ingredients combined with the yeast so the yeast can begin to act. And then I want to have my sugar and eggs all come together, and then I'll add my flour. All right, so let's just start this up. I'm gonna start it out slow. And then I'm going to turn it up to medium speed. I know this is noisy, I'm sorry. Now that's well combined. Today, here in South Carolina, we've got high pressure. It's not a lot of humidity in the air. So I want you to be careful about the amount of flour that we use. I can weigh this with this still in it, as long as I zero it. Add all your sugar, add all your other ingredients except your flour. Now with the flour, and only a half cup of sugar so far, that's correct. That is correct. Now I've got my flour pre-weighed here. This is 4 1/2 cups, or 539 grams of King Arthur all-purpose flour. And you keep hearing us use the word, the term King Arthur. King Arthur is consistent. If I'm looking for a 12% protein flour, I know that when I go to the grocery store or to the chef store or wherever else, this is going to be within that 1 or 2% range. It's not going to vary wildly like some of these other flours will. This is my salt. I'm going to add that last. So I'm going to add this flour in, but I'm not going to add quite all of it because I'm not sure if it's going to require all of it. Normally, when you find recipes in recipe books or recipes for lay people, they tend to be on the low hydration side. So somewhere around 60-65% hydration, which means 65% water to flour ratio. And that makes it easier for you to handle the dough. Wet doughs are difficult to handle and they take a lot of experience and practice. But wet doughs turn out the best bread. So just remember that. You want to add as little flour to the recipe. The recipe calls for 539 grams of flour, and you mix it all up, and then you pour flour all over your counter, and you start kneading. You're adding flour to the recipe that it didn't call for. The science didn't say that you needed all of that, so you're going to change the outcome of your bread. A counter with no flour on it is the best thing to knead on, as long as you have a bench scraper. And you can continually scrape it up and mix it back together. A little flour is not a problem, especially with this dough, and I'll show you that here in a second. So let's take our paddle attachment. We're going slow at first because you'll be wearing this flour if you turn it up high. It's coming out of here. Now, we're going to do this until it all comes together. You're going to have to scrape down the sides of your bowl periodically. All right, let's scrape down our bowl, and I'll show you where we are right now. See that? This is not all the flour yet, and there's no gluten formation. Look at that. It's just breaking and tearing. So we want to form a little bit more strength. This can take a little bit more of this flour, but I'm not going to give it all. Scrape down the sides of the bowl. If it were more humid out there, we'd have, more of a water problem than we do anything else. But today we're good. I'm operating this thing backwards today, so bear with me. Slow at first. Get that flour mixed in so you don't blow it out all over the counter with everybody, standing around, because you will be wearing it. Now let's go up high. One of the ways you know when your stand mixer is pretty much done with your dough is that it'll begin to pull away from the sides, and you'll start to hear a slapping sound. You'll see people adding flour while this thing is running. I've learned better than that. So, is everybody about in the same position I am right now? Give me a thumbs up or something if you're caught up or if you understand what's going on. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask.
No stand mixer, hold on.
No stand mixer is the same situation my grandmother was in. She just mixed it by hand. That's when you put your flour in a pile on the counter and you make a well in the center and you add your liquid ingredients to the well and then slowly, I have a video on this, and slowly mix in the flour so that you don't overwhelm the dough and you don't have water all over the counter like I did in my video. So I think that's a mixing video. It says mixing and kneading, because I actually show a different way to knead in this. But don't worry, lady without a stand mixer. Who was that? Melissa. Don't worry about it, because we're going to be by hand here very shortly. And this is really getting there. I've only got a couple of grams of flour left. I'm still not going to use it all.
Did you put in salt? She's asking, do we put in salt?
Salt. Salt goes in last, so you can't forget it. And if Melissa hadn't reminded me, I might have forgotten it. This is the amount of salt we're using. How much are we using? 1 3/4 teaspoons of salt. And with a scale, unless it's a microgram scale, you're not going to get an accurate measurement. So this is, you know, and when you're making sourdough breads, you always want to do this first before you add your salt. Anyway, salt is a very last thing. Salt does two things. It controls the yeast, it inhibits their growth a little bit, and it adds flavor to whatever you're putting it in. And I got to tell you a story a little bit later on when I get some time about what happened to me making this dough last night. Pardon me for a second, I have to take something out of the oven. So catch up if you're not there. Make sure that if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. One of the advantages of making this recipe is that you can put it in the refrigerator overnight and bake it in the morning, which is what I did because we're going to have to let this rise and I want to keep moving. So let that rest for a minute. And let's get the rest of this mixing done. We're almost done here. I'm mixing on medium-high. If you have a stand mixer like mine, it's on level 4. A little bit higher here. All right, let's come take a look. See where we are now? See how strong that is? It's because you've developed some gluten. So what we're going to do now is scrape this out of the bowl. All the way out. There's no need to add the other attachment, the dough hook at this point. And I'm going to use a little bit, because I didn't use all my flour, I'm going to use some of that on the surface here, and I'll show you an interesting way to do that. Where's my flour? Here we go. You can always add flour, but you can't take it out. So when you add flour to any kind of bread recipe like this, the dough will happily soak it up. It'll happily take it up. And you'll end up with a dense, heavy dough. So if the recipe doesn't call for it, I leave a little bit out for my kneading because this is going to go into this recipe. This is what was left over. So I'm not changing the recipe at all. Another thing is a dough scraper. These things are amazing. It helps you get everything out of the dough, helps you keep your counter clean. But wet hands for sticky dough, remember? Get it on your thumb because you're down in here. And it'll release. See how easy that released? Wet hands, sticky dough. All right, now I'm going to do a little more. And then put this off to the side in case we need it. Okay. All right, so now let's get our hands in here. Do some old-fashioned kneading. Now, listen, some people are stronger than others. Some people are more accomplished than others at things like this. So you see how the counter is, I'm using the counter to help me with the kneading effort. In a little bit, I'm not going to want that because I don't want to tear the dough after I start getting this smooth. And we're going to knead it until it's smooth. I'd rather put it on my hands than in the dough, because the sticky part is on your hands. This is not going to break, people, so don't be afraid to get in it. And if you're quick, using quick motions, it's not going to stick to your hands that much. A lot of people have a problem with getting their hands sticky, and I understand that. But the thing you have to be concerned about here is your people who work with wood can tell you when they're making a table that different kinds of wood react and behave differently. Same thing is true with dough. It reacts and behaves differently. So this is almost there. I just wanted to get it a little bit more smooth. See that? Flipping it. Keeping it clean off the counter. That's about it. A little bit more. Now see this, typically a lot of people would add flour to this because it's sticking and they're, oh my God, my hands are sticking. And the fact is, it'll take the flour if you give it to it. I put flour aside and use it as I need it. You dump it all on this dough, you can't take it out once you've incorporated it. All right. That will be sufficient enough to rise. So let's make a little ball with this. See that? Develop a little bit of tension. Bob's your uncle. So, how about something to put it in to let it rise? Mise en place, Henry. All this stuff is supposed to be sitting out here somewhere. You can use any kind of non-stick spray you want. You want this to rise in this container and not stick. So we'll pop it in there. I'll give a little spray on the top. And then I'm going to cover it with a non-stick or a cling film of some sort. Cling film of some sort. I'm on a budget, so I'm using store brand. And you know what I found out? Works just as well. Now this is going to go in a warm place to rise. Now because this is an enriched dough, it's not a lean dough like what we use with bread. Because it's enriched with eggs and milk and sugar and all of that, it's going to take longer to rise. So you've got about 2 hours to wait on this. You can get your nails done, whatever you need to do. So let's put this over here on my stovetop to get it ready. How many people are there? Shower cap works great. I used to buy these shower caps that would pop on these, and it would just be the best thing, especially when you're using them all the time. So, is everybody caught up? How are we doing? Who has any questions? Anybody have any questions? All right, I have some dough here that I started earlier this morning so that you wouldn't have to wait. Now that you're waiting on your own, you don't have to wait on me. Don't put flour in the sink, guys. Flour in the sink is a bad idea.
She says very, very, very sticky.
Add a little more flour. Just a little, Mrs. Kylie. Not a lot. And add it to your hands. Not so much your into your bread dough. Put it on the counter, give yourself some flour out here and work here, and then put your hands in the flour, come back to it. Use your dough scraper to scoop some up, scoop it up off your countertop. But you want to knead this until it's relatively smooth. That way the gluten is going to continue to form while it's rising. The yeast is going to do that work for us. So while that is happening, why don't we make our filling? So grab your container, and I'm going to show you a little trick. I like this. My grandmother taught me this. So we're going to use 5 tablespoons or 74 grams of unsalted butter. That's what I put out. But I put my butter in the freezer. And then 1 cup, 213 grams of brown sugar. Light brown sugar, dark brown sugar, doesn't matter, it's a matter of taste. 3 tablespoons or 21 grams of ground cinnamon. I use a lot of cinnamon. So I buy cinnamon containers like this from the chef store. But let's talk about this butter for a minute. What this recipe asks you to do, and there's nothing wrong with it, is to soften the butter and brush your rolled out dough with it so that the cinnamon will have something to adhere to, and that's fine. I tend to think that it turns into gas a little bit quicker, and it will tend to separate from the cinnamon roll itself. It'll leave big gaps. It's neither here nor there, but this is a good way to do it. Especially if you're doing biscuits, you need to learn this one. This is some butter I've had in the freezer overnight. Hey, I need a bandage. I've got a grater. I washed from using it this morning. How many of you done this? Some people are having struggles with their starter, with their sourdough starter from last week. We'll cover that. That happens. It's alive. It's like having children. Not all of them, you know. Sometimes on a family tree, you need to break off a few branches, do some raking. That happens with your sourdough starter. So I need 74 grams of unsalted butter. What am I doing? So let's zero that with the plate on it. I'm going to use the larger holes. And here we go. And you know when you're baking and it tells you to use a pastry cutter to cut in your butter? I have one right here. Use a pastry cutter to cut in your butter, or to use a couple of forks to do it. I just never have been any good at that. So I'm gonna do it this way. Make sure you don't grate any of the paper in there. But I don't want to put my hands directly on the butter because my skin temperature will begin to melt it. And I want it cold. I have a good feeling for where 74 grams is. So you've mixed your brown sugar together, and you've mixed your cinnamon together, and now we're about to add our butter. Let's see where we are. Got a little ways to go. That's 67. The heck with it. Don't get your fingers caught in here. Boom! 74. I like when that kind of thing happens. Yeah. Hook me up, babe. Hurry.
Jeez Louise, I didn't see this before.
I know. Hurry up. I have an injury. It's not like we're on live TV or live Facebook or anything. This is my daughter, Peyton.
Hello.
College student. Got it?
Really? Am I? Coronavirus. Sticking me out.
Yeah, but you're still a college student. All right, so we got 74 grams of butter. And take a look at what it looks like. That's pretty. Isn't that something? And it's cold. So it'll go in here and do its thing. Now I can mix this easily. And now I don't have to have, and you know, I'm all about using as few utensils and pots and pans as possible. So now I don't have to have a brush or a bowl for the melted butter. It all goes in here, but that's okay. If you've got melted butter, then you're not going to use that right now because you're going to be waiting on your dough to rise. And you can make everything, your cinnamon and your brown sugar, before you need it. So there's mine. The good thing about this is be generous with it. All right, we're not going to make our icing until a few minutes later, but I'm going to roll out some dough for you. Keep your space as clean as you can. That. This is going to be my icing. Through with those. All right. Earlier this morning, I made a batch. Let me tell you this story. Last night, I was making a batch to put in the oven so that I could take out today. We could frost it and you could see it without having to wait 2 hours on Facebook Live. And it, it's supposed to rise in 2 hours. Well, 6 hours later, it hadn't moved. I couldn't figure out why. Maybe I killed the yeast by adding the salt too early. That's why I was shy about adding it now. But what I ended up doing is making another batch, which is what you see here. It's turned out great. but I couldn't get the other one to rise. So I used about 100 grams of my sourdough starter, put it in, kneaded it in, and let it sit overnight, because sourdough takes a little bit longer to leaven your bread. And this is what I got. I may have had the oven too hot, or me not paying attention, but this is what came out of it. And what this is just, I rolled it out, cut it into little rectangles or squares, put my cinnamon inside, and I want you to see this. This is dough that would have been thrown away and would have had no use for it. Look at this. This is good. You want to taste?
Yeah.
It's got some Toledano chocolate. I can't say that. Sugar, pearl sugar on the top. This is good. You know, don't throw your dough away. Isn't that good?
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly, this is better than it being in the trash, I can tell you that. All right, counter should be dry now. So I've got a nice raisin dough. So one of the ways you determine whether dough has risen well enough is you take a floured finger. Here, I'm gonna take some flour out because I might need it. I've got a 50-pound bag of it under this sink. That's why you keep seeing me reach under there. Floured finger, poke a hole. See that? It comes back a little, but it stays in. This is ready. Isn't that something? So what I'm going to do is punch it down. See? And fold it in on itself. Just to get the air out of it so that the yeast comes back into contact with its food source, and it'll allow us to have a nice second rise. Another thing to look for, you put this stuff in too warm a situation for it to rise, and you're not stretching and folding and doing all that stuff, the bottom will sometimes get much warmer than the top, and it will stick. But I'm not going to worry about that. I use as little flour as I possibly can here, because when using your rolling pin, you've noticed when you have flour all over the counter, you roll it out and the dough comes back. So I don't want that to happen. I want it to use the friction of the counter to help me. I can put flour on the outside of this as long as it's not on the inside. My trusty, do this right over the bread. So I've got some right here on the top. Now this is supposed to be rolled out into this enormous, rectangle. You see what's happening? See where the flour ends? This is how far I've rolled it out. And this is how far I've rolled it out, and it came back. That's because I punched it down and I stressed the gluten strands. So whenever you hear in baking, let it rest, that's what we're talking about. If you're rolling out dough and it's not cooperating with you, cover it, let it rest. 5 minutes is all it takes. And then it'll start doing what you want. Plus, all this flour doesn't help. I just don't want it to stick to my rolling pin. See what it does now. A little bit better. Hear these big bubbles popping? We want those out of here. Now, this is a good time after you've got to this point in the process is to get your pan out and spray it. Preheat your oven to 400 degrees. The thing about ovens, most domestic ovens don't register a temperature well above 450 degrees. So even if your oven tells you it's 500 degrees, like we use in sourdough baking or bread baking sometimes, it may not be that, which affects the outcome of your bread. So if you're doing it a lot, invest in either a thermal thermometer or this. I can tell you that this bread is at 78 degrees, which is what I want, about room temperature. Uses a laser. See that? And I can go into my oven, can't do it through the glass, but I can go into my oven and see what temperature it is. And that tells me this oven's not getting hot enough. I'm not going to cook it thoroughly. This oven's getting too hot. That's why I have to put aluminum foil over everything to keep it from burning. So I've rolled this out, and I'm not going to be too anal about this because I've got a ruler over here and everything else to make sure it's the right size. But if you want to do that, that's fine. It should be in the instructions. So now I'm going to take my mixture of brown sugar with the little butter flakes in it, and I'm going to be as generous with this as possible. You want to leave an edge that's untouched with this stuff. Maybe put a little brush of milk or water to help it seal. This is a lot. I like it. All right, we're good. And a lot of bread, particularly when we are rolling them up, we want to roll them up a little tighter than we're going to do these. This is not going to be as tight because what happens with cinnamon buns is the tighter you roll it, as it bakes and proofs, this middle is going to come up and you're going to have a little mountain peak. Some people like that. But if you're trying to avoid that, don't make this so tight. I have two other things. Get that ready. If you haven't got your dental floss around, you want to try this along with me, and you know where your dental floss is, you can go get it and get back, go get it. I'll show you what this is about. So, let's begin to roll this up. Where's mine? There you go. It's hard working in a kitchen this size when I'm used to working in my shop. When I've got room to do stuff, this is difficult. But it's no more difficult than things y'all have to face. So, God knows I'm not complaining. So I'm just going to start it. And one of the things you could do on the end to keep it from rolling back on you is just seal that end. I'm going to seal this over here, and then I can get started again. I'm not doing this. Watch this. I'm not rolling it tight, though my tendency is to do it tight. A little flour on the outside never hurt anybody. All right, I'm almost there. So now I've got this little edge, and I want to seal it. Okay. And remember, we're working with a wet dough, kind of wet. just sealing these ends. Now, here's a little trick. Just a little bit so that you can handle it and it doesn't stick to you. And then you can kind of squeeze it and get it shaped like you want it. All right. There's your loaf, your roll. Now, a couple of things. To cut this, you're going to use a serrated edge knife, like the one I cut myself with, to cut it. Or you can try something new with your dental floss. So, it's another reason for that flour down there. Take your dental floss, move it to the center. If you have to measure that, do what you need to do. All you gotta do is, that nice? Like that? Now we're gonna go and cut this one in half. See that? That one in half. That one in half. Same thing here. There's a lot of cinnamon in here. Now, this is yours. You guys are going to be eating it. The size of these things is totally up to you. You got 8 kids, you might want to cut them smaller than this. If it's you and your husband or and your wife, make them like you like them. All right? So, we're going to take each one and sit it in here where it's got room. And then we're going to have some oven spring subsequent to that when we put it in the oven. Now, you can also add walnuts and raisin. Anytime you put, when you get to the point where you're adding this cinnamon, and you want to add walnuts or currants or raisins or anything, that's the time to do it. Get creative. This is yours. This isn't the same size pan as the other one, but I don't know that these guys will care. Okay. All right, that may not be the prettiest thing right now, but give it a minute. Cinnamon rolls take a little bit longer to get their makeup on. These will take about an hour, not even that much, if it's in a warm place to rise. Off to proof.
I'll fix that.
So we've mixed our dough. We have shaped it. We've added our cinnamon mixture and done everything we know how to do. So now let's work on the icing. Everybody ready to move towards your icing? If you are, let's go. If you're not, you can always watch this back. This is not a one-time thing. Pull out your trusty Black & Decker, whatever it is you got. I took my cream cheese out to let it come to room temperature and get soft, and then I added my butter so that it would get soft. It's 1/3 cup of cream cheese, 85 grams of cream cheese, 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter, which is about 57 grams, 1.5 cups of confectioner sugar. You may know that as powdered sugar. And 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Vanilla extract goes a long way. A little bit goes a long way.
How long is the second rise?
The second rise should be about an hour. Should be about an hour. If it's hotter in mine and cooler in yours, it's going to be different. So now that I've got the sugar, all of this added together, I'm just going to whip it. Until it all comes nice and smooth. Did you say it had 10, down to 10? All right, let's look at this. See it? It looks good, but you see a few lumps in there. So let's get those, let's just take care of those out. I've got a power issue on our phone that we're broadcasting from that, here we go. Here, take care of it. And then pull my microphone out.
This one?
After you plug that in. Give you some power. This is how you broadcast on the fly.
I know.
That's nice. See that? That's pretty. So, that's done. You may notice a difference in my microphone sound. It's because I had to put some power back on this thing. These are the ones we took out earlier. I should have tinted them. They're a little bit darker than I like, but I kind of like the crunchiness because the brown sugar, starts to caramelize, and I'm not complaining. And I ain't ashamed to eat some dark cinnamon buns. So now we're gonna just, while they're warm, not when they're hot, let them cool down for a few minutes, 10 minutes. This stuff's gonna melt. So whatever you want to do, if you want to make this a little more liquidy, and then drizzle it on here in some fancy way, that's fine. I'm just trying to get the icing on the buns and in my belly, which is considerable. I'm not a confectioner, so this is what I would hand off to somebody who knows how to decorate. I can get you there, recipe-wise. So what am I going to do with all these cinnamon buns? There's a lady down the street, or a couple doors down, who has 4 amazing boys, and it's just her. And they call me Mr. Henry because I talk to them. This is going to be for them. If you're watching, Clara, this is on its way to your house. All right, so we're good. Who wants to lick the bowl?
I do.
No, I figured you might. So there we go. Cinnamon rolls, delectable. Hand me that thing right there real quick. I'll be putting up a poll in another day or so to ask your opinion and your thoughts about what bread we make next week. Because we're going to do something different. I want to make some challah. I want to do some really cool things. This, guys, I hope yours turns out. Because this right here, I'm going to get a close shot of that. That's good. Look at that. That's so good. Glass of milk, a movie, put my feet up. Don't call me the rest of the day. I'm good. Thank you guys for participating and actually participate, who comment, who share with us what they're doing at home. We got new ideas how to make crackers out of your sourdough starter discard. People are bringing their level of knowledge and expertise to this group, and it's more than I ever expected. This is baked at 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. Now, if you tap on them, they'll sound, before I ice them, they'll sound a little hollow. That's one way to determine if they're done. Another way is, and if it's 200 degrees, you're Bob's your uncle. You're good. So 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. 15 minutes, 400 degrees is all you need. If you start looking in there and it's a little darker than you want, get some aluminum foil, put the shiny side up, and just tint it. And you can use that aluminum foil again. Just tint it and keep it from browning on top so much, okay? But this was a success, don't you think? Huh?
I do.
Okay. So don't forget to incorporate in this video at the bottom when you're commenting about
On the video you posted.
on the video and on the video I posted from earlier this week that talked about this. This can be yours. Obviously don't need another one. Happy to give it away. So, from my family to yours, from Henry's Bread Kitchen to you, I love you, and we really appreciate you being a part of this, because you're doing more for other people than you're doing for me. This is just outstanding, and I appreciate you very much. All right, see you next week. Post your pictures of your cinnamon buns, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. We're out.